All right. Hi, everyone. Happy Friday. Thanks for joining us today. Welcome to Sudozi Fridays. Thanks for taking the time the next 15 minutes. My name is Rose. I'm the founder and CEO of Sudozi. We exist to help companies grow faster, more efficiently. We get rid of the manual work so finance teams have more time to do the work with strategic leaders in the business. Today, we're bringing you a conversation with one of the most strategic finance leaders I know, who has had probably the most unique experience in finance. Mateo, Bryant, welcome to Sudozi Finance Friday.
Hey Rose, great to see you again. My experience has definitely been unique, so happy to discuss it.
Yeah, Mateo, we met at Uber, I think in 2016 or so, and you had already had a lot of great experience, particularly in LatAm in Mexico at Amazon. So maybe if you could share with our audience, what was it like in the early days and then getting to Amazon as well?
Yeah, so it's been somewhat of a circuitous path, but the question I usually get is how did you end up spending so much of your career in Latin America? Now, it all goes back to something very very mundane. When I was in high school, my parents decided not to give me any money anymore, and I went and worked at a grocery store, and it was me and all Mexican immigrants bagging groceries. I decided I wanted to learn a language. Who was I going to speak French or German with, really, in the U.S.? But Spanish, you can do that all.
Yeah.
So, that just exposed me to these guys who are just very, very different than me, this dopey 14-year-old kid. And all these people have recently...
And what city was this in?
This is in the Chicago suburbs.
Got it. Cool.
I've been a recipient of many, many immigrants from Latin America, above all Mexico. So I'm there hanging out with these guys after school and on Saturdays and Sundays. And, I later on went to university, and globalization, which is now just a fact, was like a concept in the late 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And I was reading Thomas Friedman and Paul Krugman and all that kind of stuff. And I was really into it. And I ended up studying in Argentina. And I decided I want to be part of this globalization thing. And, by these language skills, I'm going to focus on Latin America, and that'll be my thing. And what I'd noticed is one of the first industries to really embrace operating all over the world there's kind of two. There's consumer packaged goods and financial services. So after graduating, I went and worked in financial services as a reinsurance broker, dividing up
the most exciting industry.
It's actually kind of cool. It's kind of interesting. You kind of need to be an actuary to really be awesome at it. But it's like there's this hurricane right now, Ian, right? That's going to trigger all these insurance policies, and then a lot of that risk is like in Lloyd's of London and Bahamas and Bermuda and all these different places, Switzerland. So I did that for a while, but I wasn't really doing Latin America. I was doing more like US to Europe. So then I went and got an MBA, tried my hand as a derivatives salesperson in Spain. The idea at a Spanish bank, the idea being going to their Latin America operations. I was terrible at it. I was not very good at something as abstract as derivatives, and I ended up moving to Mexico to take kind of more of a traditional FP&A role. First at Cadbury, the chocolate and gum manufacturer. Now it's been folded up into Mondelez, and then another U.S. CPG firm called Conagra that makes Slim Jims and Peter Pan peanut butter and a whole bunch of other stuff. But my tech journey, and there I learned kind of like the basics of FP&A in very structured environments. So
you went from derivatives to Slim Jims?
Yeah, literally.
That's the first signal of a unique experience and a unique career coming up.
What I realized is, one, I got into the derivatives field when the financial crisis hit, the one of 2008, 2009, in that era, which is largely caused by the misuse of derivatives. And then I was like, I'm in the wrong place at the wrong time. And then I could never understood why no one cared about the underlying asset. They just didn't care. They only cared about the abstraction of the assets. So I was like, these guys are right. I'm probably wrong, but I don't get it. So I got to move out. So I went literally from derivatives to gum and beef jerky. Very, very different. But somehow, from my time in Europe, my CV or my resume was floating around some database, and I got a phone call from Amazon in Europe to move to Luxembourg, which is where they run their pan-European corporate stuff for tax reasons, to run performance marketing, the financial side of performance marketing, which is at the time was called traffic, but now it's called performance marketing. So I moved back to Europe, this time to Luxembourg, and it was a fantastic experience. I've had a gradual transition from very structured to very not structured environments. Amazon was a good first step, and I learned a lot about how do you acquire transactions and users online. And Amazon's a fantastic place to learn about it because they had to figure that out before Google and Facebook blanketed the planet with salespeople. So it was a fantastic environment. The line between myself and my colleagues on the marketing side of the house was very, very blurry, which I loved. But they ended up sending me back to Mexico because Amazon wanted to launch there, and they knew I had experience, and I was a finance person, and so there I went. Probably the only person ever to immigrate from Mexico to Luxembourg and back again. Myself and my wife, I guess. Then I showed up in Amazon in Mexico as their first Amazon CFO for that country.
Nice. And what sort of encouraged you to make the transition from Amazon over to Uber, where we had the opportunity to work together?
Well, I showed up in Mexico, and then everywhere I went, everybody was talking about Uber. Not really like in a business sense, but as the product. Like the product was just fantastic. And little did Travis Kalanick and the other fellows know, but they built a product in San Francisco that ended up being like the ideal product market fit for Latin America. Because the taxi system is terrible and oftentimes unreliable and unsafe. The pricing makes no sense. They kind of size you up and make up a price on the spot. The cities are super dense. The public transportation is bad. And then you have all these people who use the taxi system from rich all the way down to poor, and a really large group of people who are underemployed or unemployed. So like the conditions could not be better for a product like that to thrive. So, I had a great time launching Amazon in Mexico. I did make some learnings about hire fast. Tried to hire the right people, but try to do it fast because I was kind of redlining there for a while. It was pretty intense. For a while we launched and I was the only finance person. I was doing everything like taxes, bills, presenting to VPs.
Bank accounts.
Everything, and it was pretty intense. So when I went to Uber, it was an exciting opportunity. I hadn't heard people talk just so glowingly of a product since like maybe when Facebook all of a sudden like blanketed the earth in around 2008, 2009. So I thought this is something special. I should go and do this. I should try this out. And it was the bonus was I wasn't going to cover just Mexico. It was all of Latin America. I showed up and tried to make some learnings from my last experience at Amazon, which was don't bite off more than you can chew and get people to help you. In the meantime, manage expectations while you're only one person. Which I did not do that well at Amazon. I was determined not to repeat that mistake. I showed up at Amazon, and this isn't even, or pardon me, at Uber, and this isn't even, Amazon in Europe is not unstructured, but less structured. Launching Amazon in Mexico, there was a playbook that worked about 50 or 60% of the time. So it was even less structured, but there was something I could grab onto. And then Uber was I would not say totally lacking structure, but it was way different than Amazon. And you know exactly what I'm talking about. But we were putting it in at the time, which is kind of exciting. And so I focused on all the low-hanging fruit, of which there was a lot. And it was my first exposure to the growth at all costs mentality, which is kind of alive and well at Uber at that moment in time. That in of itself is one of these things that's kind of hard to square when you're coming from a more structured finance mindset. I had to figure out a way to do it. That's how I ended up at Uber in Latin America, and you and I started to hang out.
Yeah. Any, I don't know, maybe a bank account story or some like, oh my gosh, they're doing this at Uber Latin America. How is this like functional?
Well, one thing was that there's a couple different things. One was that, Uber had a fierce competitor in the US in Lyft, and a couple other people popped up along the way, but mainly Lyft. we didn't really have that in Latin America. There are a few people taking a go at it, but Uber very quickly got into a very attractive position in the market. But we were largely copying and pasting some of the competitive strategy from the US, but there was no lift on the other side. So we're kind of competing with ourselves. So there's a lot of things you do to subsidize the driver side or the rider side or both. And I began to think, I don't think we really need to do this. Because, if the market is pretty liquid and we're not fighting over drivers' times or riders' attention, perhaps these subsidies are only necessary to spin up a new market, and then you can fall away as the liquidity shows up on both sides. So that was one of the first things I did, which was pretty low-hanging fruit and something I could do on my own or with only one other analyst, was to peel away some of that kind of copy and paste strategy that just didn't really make sense. And that immediately pushed us into profitability territory, which was really exciting. And then as my team grew, we were able to go and find other, reservoirs of value that were kind of pent up, and we were able to release that largely on the rider and the driver acquisition side. So that was one thing. The other thing was in Brazil, which is our biggest market in Latin America, one of the biggest ones for Uber worldwide. We were automatically sending all of our kind of leftover cash, like our sweep, to I think Amsterdam or something like that. Pretty.
Yeah, this is on the treasury front. Yeah, and this is very much legacy systems and legacy processes in treasury.
What I found out when I went down to the Brazil office for the first time was that Brazil's really, really an intense and Byzantine place to do business, but its size makes it worth it. But they don't like money coming in and coming out, especially going back out again. So we would do that, and Brazil would tax all that money 40% every time we would do it. Right. So I began to think, I don't know if we want to be paying a 40% send the money to Amsterdam tax. We need
for it to be in Amsterdam.
That was another low-hanging fruit thing. I was more, I went with some of the treasury people in the team, let's find some other way to, lend money from this entity to others, but let's not take it out because we're killing 40% of our profits by doing this. And it was another, it was a vestige of kind of a copy and paste thing that made sense for other markets, but not necessarily.
Yeah. One thing that's impressed me about what you're able to do in these companies and what I saw you do at Uber in Latin America is just really hey, yes, you have a day job of running, finance, but you're really getting to those strategic levers in the business. And it's hey, this is my job too, right? I don't care if it's within finance or some other department, I'm going to go do this. So that's just been super impressive about how you're able to navigate all of that.
Well, there's different ways to be a good finance person. My way is that I want to understand what the ops people are doing and what they're trying to get done, and then how that translates into the P&L, which might not be immediate. Something that they do today might show up in my P&L in 6 months, or it might show up the cost might show up right now, but the benefit shows up in a year. I want to understand all that because you could be doing all the right things and the P&L momentarily looks like a disaster. Or you could be doing the wrong things and the P&L looks great. That is another thing.
Great, yeah.
I need to understand that so that I can actually tell people, are we moving in the right direction financially speaking? And that requires getting really close to ops teams, marketing teams, and other such constituents.
Absolutely. So for timing, I'm going to fast forward a little bit. You spent a few years at WeWork as well through the pandemic. So maybe we'll do another Friday session just on that, because I'm sure there are some amazing stories there. So you were at a startup called Tundra recently, and you were sort of earlier stage CFO there. What would you like to share? What are some of your experiences that were new for you in that company?
What I realized was right away was that you need, when it's just you or just you and another person, and that is the entire finance structure in the organization at that point in time, you need to find a way to make everybody else 5 or 10% a finance person, because there's things that need to be done. The scale is much smaller, but things need to be done, and you really can't be there for every decision. And you want to start to inculcate a little bit. I can really only swoop in for the gray issues. For the black and white stuff, I can't. I just can't be there all the time.
You're in charge.
Yeah, so you kind of need to teach your peers in other areas, like what are the first 2 or 3 questions you'd make on a common decision they need to make all the time, and so that they can kind of filter out the black and white decisions on their own, so then you can focus on the grayer stuff, or else there's no way you can get it. And that was probably one of my biggest learnings. But the good news is that when you come into a really early thing, there's all this low-hanging fruit. So while you get your bearings, you can find some things that are actually fairly easy to fix. They kind of buy you some time while you're figuring out all the other things that you have no understanding of, but add value in the shorter term. And you also need to remember that you don't need, especially if you're coming from a bigger company atmosphere, we're not looking for perfection, we're looking for progress. Like if you can solve 70% of the problem in an hour and 100% takes 40 hours, do the 70 and move on.
And then find the next 70 to do. Just to continue to be on that part of the curve where you're adding the most value.
Exactly. I think there's people in the finance field where knowing that there's 30% of inefficiency out there kind of can be obnoxious, but go and find those 70% good, go and get all the C pluses, get a million C pluses.
No, totally. You get a lot more bang for your buck there. All right, wrapping up here. What are your tips for young finance analysts looking to advance in finance, perhaps in tech, and wrap up with your favorite Excel shortcut?
I think that I kind of mentioned, but I think one of the best things you can do is to get really close to the operation, such that you are not a person who just you can walk around and say, sell more and spend less and we'll make money. And that's true mathematically speaking, but it's not very prescriptive. It doesn't help anyone. So go and really understand what your operation partners and the operations teams are doing, because then you can really actually help them in a way that's accretive to the bottom line and makes sense with their day-to-day. That's one of the very best things you can do, because again, you can't be there all the time. So you need to put 5% of you in every other person so that they can capture the bigger things. As far as tips go, or Excel stuff, for example, I'm not a great Excel guy. Honestly, I've never have been. But I'm a big fan of the sum ifs, but I think everybody probably thinks it's very rudimentary. The other thing I will mention is that an output of Excel can be those, what do you call it? Waterfall charts. Make the waterfall chart your friend. Don't put in a bunch of accounting noise and stuff like that. Find a way to offset it and direct people's attention to that big green or that big red bar. That's something that someone can actually do something about. So remember that don't hide things, but don't allow your waterfall charts, which are used ubiquitously, to show noise. Use it to show actionable things or interesting insights. Because if not, people go straight to that giant, like accrual was reversed bar. And what the real message might be is that our volume has gone down, but our price has gone up, and we need to understand this.
Awesome.
So that would be my don't show people asterisks. Show them generalities that are actionable.
All right, awesome. Well, we'll do one question here and then wrap up. So what are your tips for an early stage company looking for a CFO in Latin America?
Okay, that's a good question. Well, I'm one option, but
Mateo's on the market.
I would say you really need to get someone who is willing to, how would I put it? Who's willing to go after those 70% opportunities and who integrates well with the rest of the team. Finance is sexy again, all over the world, Latin America especially. The growth at all costs is kind of going away, or has gone away. But again, the integration between the finance department and the rest is really the key in my mind to success. So it's going to be a person who's just kind of bookish and checking accounting registries. That's not going to get you where you want. Where you want is someone who's helping other people make the right decision and creating like general rules and rules of thumb while that team scales up.
All right, great. Thank you, Mateo. Appreciate you coming on today. We're going to have to do many more of these because you have so many more stories to tell. And thank you everyone for tuning in or watching later. Appreciate your time, and don't miss out next week on Finance Friday. Have a good one, everyone.
Cheers. Bye-bye.